Good evening. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? That was Don't Turn Away from Soul Farm. We're making our way through Soul Farm's album and anthology. How's everybody doing? It's great to be with you on a Thursday night. Shabbos is almost here. It has been raining all day in LA, and it's a good thing. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we get together to do some beautiful learning, more midrash, more sages doing expositions on verses from the Bible, sometimes relating to the Book of Esther, sometimes not. Today's whole page is that kind of Agadata. It's going to be awesome. I'm sure you're going to find it fascinating. Who is with us? Stephen in New Hampshire, Pauline in Arkansas, Paula in Chicago, Yehuda in South Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, John in Maine, James in Indianapolis, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Bella in Florida, Leona in Illinois, Renee in Indiana, Hannah in New York, David in Indiana, Miriam in Hayden, Colorado, Nancy in North Carolina, Belle in Texas. Does anyone remember the cartoon Megilla Gorilla? Absolutely. Of course we do. I've got a gorilla for sale. Megillah gorilla. Absolutely. Miriam seems ill. Need to do replay. I hope you feel better, Miriam. May you have a complete and speedy recovery. Celsa in Texas, Shandora in the Bronx, John in Sedona, Tom with you all in spirit, just landed in Reno. Alice in Baltimore, Joe in Adelaide. That's Australia, right? Welcome, Joe, from the other side of the globe. Great to have you with us. And over there on the YouTube side, Gwen in Michigan. All right. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Tia Susi. That's Susan Kemeny, in memory of Tio Roberto, my uncle Robert. Thank you, Susie. You know, may Robert's neshama, his soul, has a very elevated place in the world of souls. A righteous man who did so many good things for so many people in his life. And may the merit of our learning today carry him even just a tiny bit higher in the world of souls. And Susie, may you and all your loved ones, and there are loved ones too, be showered in blessings. We thank you for sponsoring tonight's episode and enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. That annual campaign is winding down. It's December 23rd. I think we're at 62%. We have emunah b'tachon. We have faith and trust in God that the supporters will show up to support AT and enable us to keep our programs going and to build the AT app in the coming year. If you haven't donated yet, we hope that you will join the annual campaign. All donations are doubled thanks to our generous matchers. That's at donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. All right. We are holding. We're going to start at the bottom of the B side of page 10, but today's daf is Yud Aleph, page 11 here in Tractate Megillah, the 11th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of Purim. We're in chapter 1 and on an extended Gemara, an extended commentary on Mishna 13 here in chapter 1. These commentaries now are going to have the same structure of many a midrash, right? Many a midrash, where the rabbi is going to the particular sage is going to introduce a verse that seems unrelated to the Book of Esther or to whatever subject we're talking about, and then he's going to show the connection. He's going to build the bridge between really what we're talking about so far is we're making our way through the Book of Esther, and we're really just focusing on Esther 1:1, right? And it happened in those days, in the rule of Achashverosh, and he starts with the party that he holds because he's been ruling for a certain amount of time. and then the incident with Queen Vashti, but we're not even going to get to that so quick. We're really sort of, the rabbis are connecting the first verse of the Book of Esther, the Megillah of Purim, to verses elsewhere in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana introduced this passage with an introduction from here. So the verse states, with regard to God's reward to the righteous, where we left off yesterday. So a verse from Ecclesiastes 2:26, or in Hebrew we call this the book Koheles. He gives to a man that is good in his sight wisdom, knowledge, and joy. Right. So somebody who pleases God receives wisdom, knowledge, and joy. Excuse me. And the Gemara explains that this verse is referring to whom? To the righteous Mordechai, the hero, along with Esther, of the Book of Esther. So this verse is referring to the righteous Mordecai. With regard to the next part of the verse, right, that verse from Koheles goes, he gives to a man that is good in his sight wisdom, knowledge, and joy, but to the sinner he gives the task of gathering and heaping up. And this second part is referring to the evil Haman from the Book of Esther. And the conclusion of the verse states that he may give it to one who is good before God, right? So it's like he's going to transfer wisdom, knowledge, and joy from the sinners to the righteous. And we can see why this would apply to the story of Esther and Mordecai, because Haman seeks to destroy all the Jews. He ends up getting hung on a scaffold, and his house and all his wealth pass to Achashverosh, makes a gift of it to Esther, and she grants some of that to Mordecai. So this is Mordecai and Esther, as it is written in Esther 8:2 near the end of the story. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. New interpretation. Rabbah bar Opharon introduced this passage with an introduction from here. And I will set my throne in Elam and destroy from there the king and the princes, says the Lord. That's Jeremiah 49:38. So how is he going to tie this to the Book of Esther? The king who was destroyed. This is referring to Vashti. Interesting, he's using the word melech to refer to the Malka, Queen Vashti, who is dethroned, as it were, at the beginning of the Book of Esther. So the king who was destroyed, this refers to Vashti. And the princes, this is referring to Haman and his 10 sons. Rav Dimi Bar Yitzhak introduced this passage with an introduction from here. Now we're at the top of 11a. For we are bondmen, yet our God has not forsaken us in our bondage, but has extended mercy unto us in the sight of the kings of Persia. That's from Ezra 9:9. When did this occur? In the time of Haman. Rabbi Hanina Bar Papa introduced this passage with an introduction from here. You see, he's tying the beginning of Esther to passages from other places in the Bible. So Rav Hanina Bar Papa ties it to a verse from Psalm 66, verse 12. You have caused men to ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, but you brought us out into abundance. Through fire, this was in the days of the wicked Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the first temple, who cast the righteous into the furnace when he did that. And through water, this was in the days of Pharaoh, who decreed that all newborn males be cast into the water. But you brought us out into abundance. This was in the days of Haman, where abundant feasts played a pivotal role in both their peril, the peril of the Jews, and the salvation of the Jews. In their peril, because it was at a feast, right? That Haman petitioned that Achashverosh would kill all the Jews, and it was at a feast that Esther held, where she exposed Haman and his wickedness, that he was attacking the Jews, and turned the whole thing on him through the decree of the king. So, next interpretation. Rabbi Yochanan introduced this passage with an introduction from here. The verse states, Psalm 98, verse 3, He has remembered his mercy and his faithfulness toward the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God. When did all the ends of the earth see the salvation of our God. Not just a metaphor for like the whole world saw, but specifically, when did the ends of the earth see the salvation of the Jews from God? In the days of Mordecai and Esther, for their peril and salvation became known through the letters sent throughout the empire. And that was the biggest empire the world had ever known. Reish Lakish introduced this passage with an introduction from here, from Proverbs 28:15. As a roaring lion and a ravenous bear, so is a wicked ruler over a poor people. A roaring lion. This is the wicked Nebuchadnezzar. As it is written about him, the lion has come up from his thicket, Jeremiah 4:7. A hungry bear. This is Achashveros. As it is written about him, and behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. That's from Daniel 7:5. And Rav Yosef taught that these who are referred to as a bear in the verse are the Persians. Why are they called a bear? They are compared to a bear as they eat and drink in large quantities like a bear, and they are coated with flesh like a bear, and they grow their hair long like a bear, and they never rest like a bear, whose manner it is to move about from place to place. A wicked ruler, this is Haman, over a poor people, this is the Jewish people, who are referred to in this manner because they are poor in their observance of mitzvahs. Right? Isn't that interesting? Here, Reish Lakish is calling the Jews poor because they're poor in mitzvahs, right? Not enough of the population is being observant and keeping the commandments. And perhaps that led to the peril in the days of Mordecai and Esther. Rabbi Elazar introduced this passage with an introduction from here. Through laziness, the rafters, hamikare, sink in, yimach. And through idleness of the hands, the house leaks. Right? So through laziness, the rafters sink, and through idleness of the hands, the house sinks. That's Ecclesiastes 10:18. So Rabbi Elazar interprets the verse homiletically. Through the laziness of the Jewish people, who did not occupy themselves with Torah study, the enemy of the Holy One, blessed be he. This is very interesting. I don't think we've encountered this euphemism before in our journey. So very often we hear the enemies of the Jewish people. When the phrase the enemies of the Jewish people refers to the Jewish people who undermine us, right? The Jewish people themselves who bring God's anger upon us and cause us great problems. So who is the enemy of the Holy One? Blessed be he. Now remember, this idea that Satan is opposed to God is not a Jewish idea. Satan in Jewish scripture, in Jewish theology, is an angel appointed by God to act as a prosecutor against people who transgress. So we have a problem with Satan, but not God, because Satan is doing his job. He's pointing a finger, sometimes even tempting and causing them to stray. That's why it gets this this kind of idea of Satan is evil. But he's not evil. He's just doing his job, acting as a zealous prosecutor of the Jewish people. So who is an enemy of the Holy One, blessed be he? This is a euphemism for God himself. What does this mean? Just like we are the enemies of the Jewish people are ourselves because we undermine ourselves in God's eyes. So who is an enemy of God? I mean, it's not that God undermines God's self. What does this mean? It's a euphemism for God himself, who became poor, mach, so that, as it were, he was unable to help them. What does it mean God is unable to help us? Mach is nothing other than poor, as it is stated, Leviticus 27:8. But if he be too poor, the same word mach, for the valuation. There it's referring to a person who's too poor to give a vow based on his own valuation. And the word mikare in the verse is referring to no one other than the Holy One, blessed be he, as it is stated, who lays the beams, hamikare, of his chamber in the waters. So the idea is that we sort of impoverish God when he, in fact, when the Satan would say, look at the Jews, they're turning their back on you. They're not doing the deeds that they're supposed to do. They're not worshiping like they're running after idols. They're neglecting Torah study. They're so poor in deeds that we don't empower God, as it were, to have what to argue with. When the Satan accuses us of behaving badly, God can't respond and say, no, but look at all the good they do. We've impoverished ourselves in terms of fulfilling commandments, and therefore, as it were, we make God poor with arguments to respond. A wicked ruler. Wait a minute, I already did that. Rav Nachman, and that's the end of that interpretation. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak introduced this passage with an introduction from here. He went to Psalm 124, a song of ascents of David. If not for the Lord who was with us, let Israel now say, if not for the Lord who was with us, when a man rose up against us. Psalm 124, verses 1 and 2. The verse speaks of a man who rose up against us and not a king. This occurred in the days of Haman, as he, and not King Ahasuerus, was the chief enemy of the Jewish people. Let me just check. Something is up here. Facebook. I want to just make sure everything's all right, that we're still streaming. Yes, we are. Okay. The stream is unbroken, so if you ever have an issue, just refresh your browser, but we're not having intermittent freezing like we used to. Okay, so Rava introduced this passage with an introduction from here, Proverbs 29:2. When the righteous are on the increase, the people rejoice, but when the wicked man rules, the people mourn. When the righteous are on the increase, the people rejoice. This is Mordechai and Esther, as it is written, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad, Esther 8:15. But when the wicked man rules, the people mourn. This is Haman, as it is written, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. They were fearful because of this, rising evil power from Haman. And so what we're seeing here is that all these interpretations, by virtue of these interpretations, the rabbis are showing how other verses of the Torah, which might have seemed general, became specific and were realized by the events of the Book of Esther. Rav Matana said his introduction from here, Deuteronomy 4:7. For what nation is there so great that has God so near to them? Deuteronomy 4:7. As to witness the great miracles in the days of Mordecai and Esther. Rav Ashi said his introduction from here. The verse states, or has God ventured to go and take him a nation from the midst of another nation? That's Deuteronomy 4:34. And this happened in the times of Esther. God saved the Jewish people who were scattered throughout the Persian Empire. The Gemara returns to its interpretation of the Book of Esther. Right now, we've just been tying verses elsewhere in the Bible to the events of the Book of Esther. Now we're going back to specifically verses from the Book of Esther. So back to Esther 1:1. Vayhi bimei. And it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. Rav said the word Vayhi may be understood as if it said Vi and he, meaning woe and mourning. And this is as it is written, and there you shall sell yourselves to your enemies for bondsmen and bondswomen, and no man shall buy you. This is from the book of Deuteronomy, when Moses is giving his final sermons to the children of Israel who are about to enter the promised land. Moses won't be able to accompany them. Joshua will lead them in. And he's telling you, let me tell you what's going to befall you in the future, right? You're going to turn away from your God. So first, if you'll keep the commandments, and he gives a big list of blessings, all the good things that will happen. But if you turn away and if you serve other gods, then a long list of curses, what's going to befall you. And one of those curses is now sort of coming true in the days of Esther and Mordecai. And there you shall sell yourselves to your enemies for bondsmen and bondswomen, and no man shall buy you. The repetitive nature of the verse indicating that no one will be willing to buy you for servitude, but they will purchase you in order to murder you, right? That's what Haman did. He didn't say, here, King Ahasuerus, here's a bunch of money so I can have a bunch of Jews be my slaves. He said, Let me give you a big bribe so that you give me permission to kill all the Jews, and thereby realizing the curse that Moses had uttered centuries before. And Shmuel said his introduction from here. And yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them. So it's like after Moses completed that whole list of curses, then he gives hope and he says, even though you're going to be cursed here, there, everywhere, because of your bad behavior, God is going to heap curses on you. And yet he will never totally abandon you, because there's a covenant of our ancestors, our patriarchs and matriarchs, the covenant with God. And God said he would never abandon the Jewish people. And so we might be, persecuted terribly. We might be made to suffer. We might endure so many different curses. And yet, says God, I will not reject them, nor will I abhor them to destroy them utterly and to break my covenant with them. For I am the Lord their God. And since God made a covenant, God would never break it. God keeps promises, unlike humans. Shmuel explains, I will not reject them. This was in the days of the Greeks. Nor will I abhor them. This was in the days of Vespasian, who destroyed the Second Temple. To destroy them utterly. This was in the days of Haman in the Book of Esther. To break my covenant with them. This was in the days of the Persians. For I am the Lord their God, meaning that is for always, and this is in the days of Gog and Magog. That means that the final days, right? At the final days, when Mashiach comes, the final battles are fought, and he ushers in the Messianic age. There's going to be cataclysm. There's going to be apocalypse of some sort. There will be the wars of Gog and Magog. An alternative understanding was taught in a Baraisa. I will not reject them. This was in the days of the Chaldeans, when I appointed for them Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael, and Azariah to pray on their behalf. Nor will I abhor them. This was in the days of the Greeks, when I appointed Shimon Hatzadik for them, and the Hasmonean and his sons, and Matisyahu the high priest, to destroy them utterly. This was in the days of Haman, when I appointed for them the righteous leaders Mordecai and Esther. To break my covenant with them. This was in the days of the Romans, when I appointed for them the sages of the house of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and the sages of other generations. For I am the Lord their God. This will be in the future, when no nation or people of a foreign tongue will be able to subjugate the Jewish people anymore. Rabbi Levi said his introduction from here, from Numbers 33:55. But if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those whom you allow to remain of them shall be as thorns in your eyes. Remember that Joshua was going into the promised land with a mandate direct from God, that the nations who were practicing abominations in the Holy Land, particularly child sacrifice, that they needed to be driven out. And if you allowed any of them to remain, they would be thorns in your eyes. King Saul's failure to completely annihilate Amalek allowed for the existence of his descendant, Haman, who acted as a thorn in the eyes of Israel during the Purim episode. Rabbi Chia said his introduction from here, the continuation of the previously cited verse. And it shall come to pass that as I thought to do unto them, so I shall do unto you. Prior to the miracle of Purim, the Jewish people were subject to the punishment that the Torah designated for its enemies because they did not fulfill God's commandments. The Gemara continues with its explanation of the Book of Esther, beginning with a discussion of the name Achashverosh. Rav said, the king in the story, Rav said, the name should be viewed as a contraction. The brother of the head, Achiv Shel Rosh, and of the same character as the head, Megillah Shel Rosh. And Rav explains, the brother of the head, i.e. the brother of the wicked Nebuchadnezzar, who is called head, as it is stated, you are the head of gold, Daniel 2:38. Of the same character as the head, for he, Nebuchadnezzar, killed the Jews, and he, Achashverosh, sought to kill them. He destroyed the temple, Nebuchadnezzar, and he sought to destroy the foundations for the temple laid by Zerubbabel, as it is stated. And in the reign of Achashverosh, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote to him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem, Ezra 4:6. And he ordered that the construction of the temple cease, since he had power over this entire empire. That empire included the land of Israel, and they had already begun the construction of the second temple. And then he ordered that that construction be halted. It was like destroying the temple. And Shmuel said the name Achashverosh should be understood in the sense of black, shahor, as the face of the Jewish people was blackened in his days like the bottom of a pot. And Rabbi Yochanan said a different explanation. Everyone who recalled him said, woe upon his head, ach lerosho. And Rabbi Hanina said the name alludes to the fact that everyone became poor, Rosh, in his days, as it is stated, and the king, Achashverosh, laid a tribute upon the land, a heavy tax that impoverished everybody. And the Gemara continues, this is, right? So who, the word who means this is, who Achashverosh, this is Achashverosh. And the term who, this is, comes to teach that he remained as he was in his wickedness from beginning to end. Similarly, wherever the words this is, who, appear in this manner, the verse indicates that the individual under discussion remained the same from beginning to end. For example, who Esav? This is Esav. Genesis 36:43. Esav is Esau, Jacob's brother, and he remained in his wickedness from beginning to end. Who Dasan and Ve'aviram, right? So that's how we're going. Who Dasan Ve'aviram? This is Dasan, Datan, and Abiram, and they remained in their wickedness from beginning to end. Who the king Ahaz, from 2 Chronicles 28:22, and he remained in his wickedness from beginning to end. It's like when the Bible tells you, this is Achashverosh, this is Esav, this is Ahaz, then these are people whose character does not change. They're not just telling you that this is the person named in a particular episode where his name comes up in the verse, but rather that characteristic of that person is who that person is throughout their life. And the Gemara continues, the word who is also used to recognize sustained righteousness. Avram, who became Abraham, who Avram, who Avraham. Abram, this is Abraham. This indicates that Abraham didn't change as he remained in his righteousness from beginning to end. Similarly, who Aaron v'Moshe. This is Aaron and Moses. They remained in their righteousness from the beginning of their life to the end. Similarly, with respect to David, King David, and David, who was the youngest. In this case, who, the Hebrew word, and David, this was the youngest, indicates that he remained in his humility from beginning to end. Just as in his youth, when he was still an ordinary individual, he humbled himself before anyone who was greater than him in Torah, so too in his kingship, he humbled himself before anyone who was greater than he in wisdom. The next term in the opening verse, who reigned. So this had happened in the days of Achashverosh. This is Achashverosh who reigned, right, over this massive empire from Hodu to Cush. So who reigned is now interpreted. And Rav said, who reigned, right, like a king reigns. So this comes to teach that he reigned on his own without having inherited the throne. He was a usurper. And some say this to his credit, and some say it to his disgrace. The Gemara explains, some say this to his credit, that there was no other man as fit as him to be king. And some say to his disgrace that he was not fit to be king, but he distributed large amounts of money, and in that way he rose to the throne. He bought the throne. The opening verse continues that Achashverosh reigned from Hodu to Cush. And Rav and Shmuel disagreed about its meaning. One of them said, Hodu is a country at the end of the world, and Cush is a country at the other end of the world. And the other said, Hodu and Cush are situated next to each other. And the verse means to say as follows: just as Ahasuerus reigned with ease over the adjacent countries of Hodu and Cush, so too he reigned with ease from one end of the world to the other. On a similar note, you say with regard to Solomon, King Solomon, for he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river, from Tifsa even to Gaza. And also with regard to this, Rav and Shmuel disagreed. One said Tifsa is at one end of the world, whereas Gaza is at the other end of the world. And one said Tifsa and Gaza are situated next to each other, and the verse means to say as follows: just as Solomon reigned with ease over the adjacent Tifsa and Gaza, so too he reigned with ease over the entire world. And the opening verse continues, stating that Ahasuerus reigned over 7 and 20 and 100 provinces, right? He ruled over the 127 provinces. And Rav Chisda said, this verse should be understood as follows. At first, he ruled over 7 provinces. And then he reigned over 20 more. And finally, he reigned over another 100. And the Gemara asks, however, if that is so, with regard to the similarly worded verse, and the years of the life of Amram were 7 and 30 and 100. This is the father of Moses at Exodus 6:20. What would you expound from it? And the Gemara answers, it is different here in the Book of Esther, as this part of the verse is entirely superfluous, since it is already written from Hodu to Cush. Why then do I need 7 and 20 and 100 provinces? Rather, learn from there that these words come for this exposition, to teach that Ahasuerus did not begin to reign over all of them at the same time. He grew his empire. New subject. Apropos the discussion of the kingdoms of Ahasuerus and Solomon, the Gemara cites a Baraisa in which the sages taught 3 men ruled over the entire world. And they were, first one is surprising, Ahav, King Ahab, and Ahasuerus and Nebuchadnezzar. So the Gemara explains, Ahav. Now how can you say that King Ahab, who was a wicked king of Israel, ruled over the whole world? How could that be? As it is written in the words of Obadiah, the servant of Ahav, to Elijah, the prophet Elijah, as the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master has not sent to seek you. And they said, he is not there. And he made the kingdom and nations swear that they had not found you. That's 1 Kings 18:10. And if he did not reign over them, how could he have made them swear? Apparently, then, he reigned over the entire world. At least he had tremendous influence and power. Probably it helped him out that he married the wicked Jezebel, who was the daughter of the king of a very large kingdom north of Israel. Nebuchadnezzar also ruled over the whole world, as it is written, and it shall come to pass that the nation and the kingdom that not serve this same Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, and that will not put their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylonia, that nation will I visit, says the Lord, with the sword and with the famine and with the pestilence, until I have consumed them by his hand. Jeremiah 27:8. Ahasuerus also ruled the world, as we have said above, from Hodu to Cush, the 127 provinces. So after mentioning 3 kings who, at least metaphorically, if not literally, ruled over the known world, the Gemara presents a mnemonic for the names of other kings that will be discussed below. Shin, Samech, Dalet, Kaf. Right? Shin stands for Solomon, Shlomo. Samech stands for Sennacherib. Dalet is for Darius. And Kaf is for Cyrus, or in Hebrew, Koresh. And the Gemara asks, but is there no other king besides those previously mentioned who ruled over the entire world? But there is King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, who ruled over the world and should be added to the list. And the Gemara answers, King Solomon did not complete his kingship, as he left the throne during his lifetime, and therefore his name doesn't appear on the list. I mean, he ruled, right? He was king over he had a very, very powerful, very influential king receiving tribute from all the nations of the world in his time. So you could say that he ruled over the world. So why do we take away from that somehow he didn't finish his kingship? Let's see. We're on the B side, by the way. We have been for a paragraph. And the Gemara asks, this works out well according to the one who said that Solomon was first a king and then a commoner who never returned to his throne. But according to the opinion of the one who said that he was first a king and then he was a commoner and then afterward he regained his throne and became king again, what can be said to explain why he is not mentioned in the list of kings who ruled over the entire world? And the Gemara answers, there was something else about Solomon that makes it impossible to compare him to this list of three. For he ruled over the inhabitants of the heavenly worlds, i.e. demons and spirits, as well as the human inhabitants of the earthly worlds. As it is stated, 1 Chronicles 29:23, then Solomon sat upon the throne of the Lord as king, which indicates that his reign extended even to the heavenly worlds, with King Solomon sitting upon the throne of the Lord, and therefore he cannot be compared to the others who merely ruled on earth. And obviously, it doesn't even enter our minds to say that he somehow had power over God. That's not what it means. It's just that God gave him dominion over more than just the humans on earth, also these spirits and demons. And the Gemara asks further, but there was Sennacherib who ruled over the entire world, as it is written, Isaiah 36:20. Who are they among all the gods of these countries that have delivered their country out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? And the Gemara answers, there is Jerusalem that he did not conquer, as indicated in the verse, so he didn't rule over the whole world. And the Gemara says, well, what about Darius? As it is stated, then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you, Daniel 6:26. And the Gemara answers, there are the 7 provinces over which he did not rule. As it is written, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. And it is apparent from here that Darius did not rule over the entire world, for his son Ahasuerus ruled over 127 provinces, an additional 7. And the Gemara raises another question. So Ahasuerus was not some kind of a usurper if his father was the king, but somehow he had his own claim on the throne, not just from his father. Perhaps the throne would have gone to someone else, except Ahasuerus took it, almost like Solomon's brother sought to do, but was not successful in. And the Gemara raises another question, but there is Cyrus, as it is written, thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. And the Gemara answers, this is not proof that he ruled the world, for there he was merely boasting about himself, although in fact there was no truth to his words. New subject. Checking time. The second verse in Esther states, in those days when the king, Ahasuerus, sat on the throne of his kingdom, Esther 1:2, implying that the events to follow took place during the first year of his reign. And one verse afterward, it is written, in the 3rd year of his reign, in Esther 1:3, indicating that it was in the 3rd year, not the 1st. So what is the contradiction? Rav has said there is no contradiction. What is the meaning of when he sat, keshevet? It is intended to indicate that he acted not immediately upon his rise to the throne, but rather after his mind was settled, shenitya sheva, and he overcame his anxiety and worry with regard to the redemption of the Jewish people. He said to himself as follows, Belshazzar, the king of Babylonia, calculated and erred with regard to the Jewish people's redemption. I too will calculate, but I will not err. And the Gemara explains, what is this calculation? As it is written with regard to Jeremiah's prophecy of a return to the land of Israel, after 70 years are accomplished for Babylonia, I will remember you and perform my good word toward you, enabling you to return to this place. Jeremiah called it. He said the Babylonian exile will last 70 years. So when do those 70 years end? That's the calculation that it would seem the Babylonian king messed it up, and Ahasuerus wants to be a little bit careful about it. And elsewhere it is written in a slightly different formulation in the book of Daniel. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, meditated in the books over the number of the years which the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish for the desolations of Jerusalem 70 years. Daniel 9:2. And he, Belshazzar, calculated as follows: 45 years of Nebuchadnezzar, 23 years of Evil-Merodach, and 2 of his own, for a total of 70 years that had passed without redemption. And he was therefore certain that Jeremiah's prophecy would no longer be fulfilled. And he therefore said, I will take out the vessels of the holy temple and use them. When Nebuchadnezzar sacked the first temple, he took the vessels, all right, the holy vessels that the priests would use to bring offerings, like the incense altar, and the golden vessels used to receive the blood of offerings or the incense taken into the sanctuary on Yom Kippur, those holy vessels made of gold and silver. And he wanted to just use them for his own, like at his own table, for like nice decorations on the king's table to impress people. Oh, see, I took this from the holy temple of the Jews, and they couldn't stop me even with their God. Here they are to show how powerful I am, was Nebuchadnezzar's point. And the Gemara asks, well, from where do we derive that Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 45 years? And as the master said, they were exiled in the 7th year. They were exiled in the 8th year. They were exiled in the 18th year. And they were exiled in the 19th year. And the Gemara explains, they were exiled in the 7th year after Nebuchadnezzar's subjugation of Jehoiakim. And it was in what was known as the exile of Jehoiakim, which was actually the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Then later, they were exiled a second time in the 18th year after the subjugation of Jehoiakim, in what was known as the exile of Zedekiah, which was actually in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. As the master said, in the first year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar conquered Nineveh. In his second year, he conquered Jehoiakim. And as it is written, and it came to pass in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judea, in the 12th month, on the 25th day of the month, that Evil-Merodach, king of Babylonia, in the first year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiakim, king of Judea, and brought him out of prison. And the Gemara calculates, since Evil-Merodach acted in the first year of his reign, immediately after coming to power, so it turns out that Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 8 years before he sent Jehoiakim into exile, and 37 years during which Jehoiakim was in his prison, and this equals 45 years of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. And the 23 years of Evil-Merodach are known through tradition, and together with the 2 years of Belshazzar, this brings the count of the years of exile to 70. And at that point, Belshazzar said to himself, well, now for sure they will not be redeemed, and therefore I will take out the vessels of the holy temple and use them. And this is what Daniel said to him with regard to his impending punishment for using the temple's vessels. But you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you. Daniel 5:23. And it is written further in the chapter, in that night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain. And this was a description of Belshazzar's mistaken calculation. I haven't refreshed my memory on the book of Daniel, but somebody can remind me if I'm wrong. Isn't that the incident where Daniel says the writing is on the wall that led to the demise of Belshazzar? And it states, after the fall of Belshazzar and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So Ahasuerus said, he, Belshazzar, erred, he made a mistake. I too will calculate, but I will not make a mistake. Thinking he understood the source of Belshazzar's mistake. Is it written 70 years for the kingdom of Babylonia? It is written 70 years for Babylonia. What is meant by for Babylonia? These words are referring to the 70 years for the exile of Babylonia. How many years are still lacking from the 70? 8 years. He calculated and inserted in their stead 1 year of Belshazzar and 5 years of Darius and Cyrus and 2 years of his own, bringing the total to 70. And once he saw that 70 years had been completed and the Jewish people were still not redeemed, he said, so now for sure they will not be redeemed. Therefore, I will take out the vessels of the temple and use them. What happened to him? As a punishment for what he did, the Satan came and danced among them and brought confusion to his celebration until he killed Vashti. So Ahasuerus himself was not, killed because of this desecration of using the holy vessels of the temple at his party, but it did lead to the destruction of his bride, of Queen Vashti. And I am just about done. If you've got any questions or comments, I'm coming to them. And the Gemara asks, but he calculated properly. He did calculate properly. Why then did this happen? And the Gemara answers, no, he too made a mistake in his calculation, for he should have counted from the destruction of Jerusalem at the time of the exile of Zedekiah, and not from the first exile of Jehoiakim. And we'll continue that discussion tomorrow with God's help. All right, let's see if we've got questions or comments on Daf Yud Aleph, page 11 here in Tractate Megillah. See, I have to verify it's me. Come on, Google. Let me into the Google Doc. What's going on here? This is very strange. We've never had this problem before. Nina selects the questions and passes them to me through a Google Doc, and for some reason I can't get in the Google Doc. Very odd. I don't know what to say about that. What should I try? Oy vey. Let's just try to get in there again. Google Docs. Sign in. Very strange. Google's malfunctioning. Okay, so I'm just going to try to scan the comments here myself. Okay. Renee, I'm still wrapping my brain around Greek-speaking Jews reading the Septuagint in Egypt. So we were talking about that yesterday, the day before, that translation of the first translation of the Bible out of Hebrew that was into Greek. And Renee says, I visited Alexandria to see the great library and chase Maimonides, and looking forward to community space in the app to continue some of these discussions. Yeah, that is something that we are planning to have a nice, sort of forum for people, take that extra step, go into the app and have a place to reach out to each other, so it can be even more community minded than in the comments during the shows or the AT forum. Bill, but hold fast, couldn't Darius have held those other 7 provinces as his personal fiefdom, the crown lands separate from the 120 satrapies? Interesting. I'm not sure, but interesting, could be. And Bill, that is indeed the writing on the wall. Incident mene tekli ufarshin. Thank you. Very good. So that's when Daniel said, your days are numbered, Belshazzar. Very good. And Yosef, on Solomon reigning over the spiritual world, right, the demons and spirits, I once looked into the tradition about Solomon and the Shadim, the demons, and Asmodeus. Interesting story about the building of the temple. Maybe that's for another day. Bill, phenomenal technological power, itty bitty malfunctions. Just so. Isn't it amazing, right? When we were kids, we could never have imagined that I could be broadcasting from my own office all around the world, and people could be tuning in and following and all of us learning together, and yet I can't sign into Google Docs. Phenomenal tech power, itty bitty malfunctions. Just so. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, the regular Friday time. That's noon Pacific, as we prepare for Shabbos. Shabbos is starting to come in a little bit later each week now. Right, it's interesting. We just went through the winter solstice, right? That's the shortest day of the year. But the earliest Shabbos was a little bit before that. And now the time is starting to get, but it's still creeping up. It's still very early. I think candle lighting in LA is, it's still like 4:30 tomorrow. So there's a lot to do on Fridays, but whatever. We'll have our class at noon Pacific with God's help. Have a great evening and look forward to being with you tomorrow, God willing.